"Don't eat that!" The voice cracked like a thunderclap, sharp, urgent, misplaced in the hush of midday. He was used to silence, especially the curated kind, white noise fountains, symphonic birdsong, filtered sun breaking through trimmed branches. It was a Tuesday like any other. The bench was cold. The food was warm. Truffle risotto from a restaurant with no sign on the door. Then came the voice, then the boy. Bare feet, rusted eyes, clothes that didn't fit and a wound in the shape of hunger, not just the stomach kind, the other kind, the one that stretches memory and bends dignity. People looked, then looked away. But he didn't. There was something in the boy's eyes, a mirror maybe, or a key. The breeze carried a sweetness from the bakery across the street, but his hands stayed frozen over the plate. The boy was still staring, chest rising too fast for his frame. Behind him, the city kept moving, indifferent cars, chattering shoes, cameras without film. And in the space between two heartbeats, something old inside the man stirred. Not guilt, not yet. Recognition. The boy's voice shattered the stillness with such force that it seemed to fracture the very light that filtered through the sycamore leaves. His shout, raw, jagged, hung in the air long after the last syllable fell silent. The billionaire, Everett Cole, lifted his gaze slowly. Fork suspended mid-air, the risotto still steaming. Everett had cultivated a life where interruptions were rare and unwelcome. His daily routine was a monument to control. Breakfast prepared by a chef flown in from Naples, meetings choreographed to the second, even his leisure carved into silent blocks of curated solitude. The park bench, though public, was still a choice, a curated moment of staged simplicity in an otherwise untouchable life. Yet here stood a boy out of breath, face smudged with city soot, hair matted with oil and dust, looking straight into his eyes with something close to terror. The boy's voice was small now. "Please don't eat that." Everett blinked, his body frozen, but his mind suddenly spinning with possibilities. Poison? A prank? A scam? But the boy didn't move closer, didn't plead or grovel. He simply stood his ground, arms slack by his sides, as if too tired to explain but too desperate not to try. Around them the park exhaled. A jogger slowed, a pigeon fluttered off a nearby branch, an elderly woman adjusted her sunglasses to get a better view. Still no one intervened. The billionaire and the boy were trapped in a bubble of tension, like a glass dome no one else could enter. Everett lowered the fork. Why? The boy's lips parted, but no words came. Just a flicker of something behind his eyes, regret, or maybe shame. Then, with the faintest shake of his head, he turned and began to walk away, shoulders hunched forward, thin spine curved like a question mark against the sky. Everett stood, against instinct, against reason. Wait. The boy didn't. His pace quickened. Not quite a run, but not slow enough to ignore. Something tightened in Everett's chest, an old feeling, one he hadn't touched in years. He tossed the fork onto the bench and followed. The city changed its rhythm as they moved. The paths grew narrower, the air thicker with exhaust and sweat, and the sounds harsher. Metallic echoes of trains, street vendors barking for attention, children crying in invisible apartments. The boy weaved through alleyways like he had done it 1,000 times. Everett followed with the caution of someone who knew he didn't belong. Finally, the boy ducked into a cracked doorway, vanishing into a shadow. Everett paused outside. The building was the kind he had once bought just to demolish. Brick veins showed beneath peeled plaster. A rusted mailbox dangled by a single screw. He hesitated, the edges of his $5,000 shoes scuffing against the broken sidewalk. Inside it was dark, damp, smelling faintly of mildew and metal. A single bulb swayed from the ceiling, casting jagged shadows. The boy sat on a mattress with no sheets, arms wrapped around his knees. He didn't flinch when Everett entered. "You followed me. You ran." A silence stretched between them, brittle and uncertain. Then the boy spoke. "It's not the food. It's what's in it." Everett's brow furrowed. "You mean poison?" "No," the boy said, quieter. "Memory." There was something surreal about standing in that dim room, a place so far removed from Everett's life it might as well have been another country. Yet here he was, face to face with a child who looked like he hadn't slept under a roof in weeks, speaking in riddles that sounded more like prophecy than logic. Everett sat slowly on the edge of a crate. Start from the beginning. The boy's name was Caleb. He was 9, maybe 10, he wasn't sure anymore. His mom used to make risotto on Sundays, not with truffles, with canned mushrooms and powdered broth. It wasn't the taste that made Everett freeze. It was the boy's voice when he said it, hollow, like someone reciting a ghost story from memory. She died last winter, Caleb said. Gas leak. I was at school, came back and... He stopped, didn't finish. Everett didn't speak. He couldn't. She used to say, Caleb murmured, that food remembers who made it. Everett looked down at his own hands, manicured, moisturized, worthless in a kitchen. He couldn't remember the last time he had cooked anything, let alone for someone else. Caleb stared at him. I smelled the mushrooms. I thought it was hers, but it wasn't. It was yours. A chill moved through Everett like a warning. The air in the room seemed to pulse. I thought she was still here, Caleb whispered. But she's not. Outside, a siren wailed. Inside, nothing moved. Everett exhaled, a long, silent breath. The weight of his forkless lunch still lingered on his fingertips. The boy's voice had pulled a thread. And something buried was beginning to unravel. The next morning, Everett didn't return to his bench in the park. Instead, he sat in the back seat of his Bentley, engine purring low, watching the cracked doorway where Caleb had disappeared the night before. The chauffeur Anton glanced at him through the rearview mirror, but Everett didn't speak. His fingers rested on a folded napkin on his lap, the same cloth from yesterday's lunch, still faintly smelling of truffle oil and shame. Caleb hadn't asked for anything. No money, no help. Just, don't eat that. And then he walked away, carrying the kind of weight Everett had spent a lifetime ignoring. Hours passed. Children spilled onto the sidewalk, some in mismatched uniforms, others barefoot. None of them looked twice at the car. Everett didn't expect them to. His world had always been glass and distance. He watched, he observed, he never entered. But then, there he was. Caleb. Same torn shirt, same eyes. Everett stepped out of the car. The boy noticed him but didn't stop. He crossed the street slow and deliberate, a plastic bag swinging from one hand. Everett followed again, careful not to get too close, letting the rhythm of the boy's steps guide him. This time, Caleb led him farther downtown, past shuttered storefronts, a burned-out bodega, and murals that had begun to fade into the brick. They reached a community kitchen, graffiti on the doors, but a line already forming outside. Everett stood across the street, watching. Caleb entered alone, head down. Something inside Everett itched. He crossed, ignoring the stairs, and stepped inside. The smell hit first. Stew, metal, bleach. Volunteers moved with purpose, hairnets askew, kindness written in their exhaustion. And then he saw him at the end of the line holding out his hands for a tray. No one recognized Everett, not in his tailored coat, not in his silence. A volunteer, a middle-aged woman with rough hands, approached him. You here to serve or be served? The question lingered. Everett looked past her, toward the boy. To learn, he said finally. She laughed. Then roll up your sleeves. By the time Everett found Caleb again, the boy was sitting alone, pushing beans around his plate. Everett sat across from him without invitation. Caleb didn't flinch. You're back, the boy said without looking up. I couldn't stop thinking about what you said. Caleb shrugged. Most people do. Then they forget. I don't want to forget. The boy raised his eyes slowly. Why? Everett paused, unsure of the answer. Because I think I already have. There was no reaction, just quiet. Then Caleb said, You ever lose someone? The words came too fast. My brother. Caleb nodded, as if that explained everything. Did it make you feel hollow too? Everett's breath caught. He nodded once. My mom, Caleb said, she made things out of nothing, not just food, hope. She made me believe we had more than we did. Until we didn't. Everett remembered his own mother, quiet and stern, always looking at him like he was a mirror of a man she both loved and feared. But it wasn't her he thought of now. It was his brother, Jason, bright, loud, full of plans that never fit inside the narrow hallways of their home. Jason had disappeared into the system when Everett was 15. Drugs, streets, then silence. No funeral, no closure, just an absence that calcified over time. I used to think if I got rich enough, successful enough, I could outrun him, Everett said, but he shows up in places like this. Caleb didn't respond. Everett leaned in. What do you want to be when you grow up? The boy blinked, caught off guard. I don't know. Alive. The simplicity of it hit harder than any memory. Everett opened his wallet, pulled out a business card, then hesitated. Instead, he placed it on the table without a word and stood to leave. Caleb watched him go, but didn't touch the card. Outside, the air was sharp. The clouds had gathered low over the skyline, threatening rain. Everett walked not to his car, not back to the park, but aimlessly. He passed buildings he owned, properties his name financed. People rushed by, heads down, lives compressed into screens and deadlines. No one knew him. No one knew what he was carrying. Back home, his penthouse was too quiet, too white, too sterile. He poured himself a glass of water and stared at the empty plate on the counter. No appetite. The next day he returned to the soup kitchen. Caleb was there again. Same shirt, different bag. This time the boy approached first. You came back. Everett nodded. Caleb sat beside him. I looked you up. You're rich. And you're brave. That made Caleb smirk, just a little. You could have let me eat that risotto, Everett said. You could have walked past. But you didn't. Because it wasn't right. And you knew that without even knowing me, the boy shrugged. Some things you just feel. Everett looked down. You ever feel like you were meant to do something? Yeah, Caleb said. And then life tells you you're not. Everett's voice cracked. Then maybe it's time life hears something back. The third time they met, it rained. Not a gentle drizzle, but a steady rhythmic downpour that drowned the city in grey. Water slid down the windows of the soup kitchen like tears too old to be wiped away. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed louder than usual, as if resisting the gloom outside. Caleb sat near the back this time, staring at the window, his tray untouched. Everett walked in without hesitation. The volunteers no longer looked at him with suspicion. He had earned their quiet acceptance by scrubbing pans and listening more than he spoke. He slid into the chair across from the boy. Neither said a word for a long time. Then Caleb asked, Did you really have a brother? Everett nodded. Jason. What happened? Everett ran a finger along the rim of a paper cup. He disappeared. Got caught in something I escaped. Drugs, foster care, anger. Caleb's gaze didn't move from the window. Mine disappeared too, not in a storm, in a system. I think they call it protective custody. Never saw him again. Everett's chest tightened. What was his name? Dre. The syllable landed between them like an open wound. Caleb said it with so little breath it was almost sacred. Everett exhaled slowly. When I was 16, I got a scholarship to a private boarding school. My mum cried when I left. Jason didn't come to the station. I thought he was mad. But later I found out. He wasn't even told. They didn't think it mattered anymore. He stopped. The words felt heavier than they used to, maybe because he wasn't telling them to a therapist or a colleague or a mirror. He was telling a child who knew the shape of loss too well. My brother used to say I'd forget him once I made it out, Everett said. He was wrong, but he was also right. Caleb finally turned from the window. You remind me of someone. Everett looked up. Caleb dug into the pocket of his oversized jacket, pulling out a faded, wrinkled photograph. It was barely legible, creased, stained, but Everett recognized the shape of the face before the details formed. Jason, younger, smiling, arms wrapped around two boys, one of them Caleb. Everett's voice caught. Where did you get this? Caleb was calm, too calm. He was our guardian. For about a year, the best one we had. The world tilted. Everett had imagined Jason lost in alleyways, not raising children. I didn't know he... Everett couldn't finish. Caleb nodded. He taught us to read, taught us to cook, said every boy needed to learn how to make his own future with his own hands. The weight of that truth broke something open in Everett. Jason hadn't vanished into the shadows. He had transformed quietly into someone who gave others a chance. While Everett built glass towers, Jason had built warmth out of nothing. He died in a fire, Caleb continued, voice steady. Old radiator sparked. He got us out, didn't make it himself. Everett stared at the photo. His brother's eyes were still bright, still defiant. He hadn't just died. He had chosen. Saved. Why didn't anyone tell me? Everett whispered. Maybe they didn't know who to tell, Caleb said. He didn't talk much about you. Just once. What did he say? Caleb met Everett's eyes. That he hoped you remembered how to love things that didn't shine. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of the weight of years, of stories not told, of men who became myths to each other. Later that night, Everett stood in his office, staring at a screen filled with unread emails, untouched contracts. He opened a search window and typed, Jason Cole. Nothing, no obituary, no headline, just a single line in an archived fire report. And in that moment, Everett realized that legacy wasn't built by wealth or records. It was etched into people like Caleb, invisible, until someone bothered to look. The next morning, Everett returned to the soup kitchen not with a car, but with a pan. In it, mushroom risotto. The same way Jason used to make it. Simple, imperfect, real. Caleb tasted it and nodded. This tastes like him. Everett smiled, a little broken. I hope so. Don't change the recipe, Caleb said. Memories in the burnt edges. They sat together in silence again, but this time it felt different, not hollow, just quiet, like a breath held for too long finally released. There were no photographs of Jason in Everett's home, no letters, no leftover shirts or forgotten cologne bottles. Just a name once spoken, then buried under accolades and IPOs. But now Jason's memory was everywhere, in the scratch of Caleb's voice, in the burn of simple food, in the ache that returned to Everett's chest like an old friend knocking on a long-locked door. The following weeks moved slowly, deliberately. Every Tuesday, Everett returned to the soup kitchen, not as a benefactor, not as a guest, but as a man learning how to be ordinary again. He chopped onions, burned rice, listened to stories without checking his watch. And always Caleb was there, his presence quiet but solid, like a tether to a version of Everett he hadn't known he missed. One afternoon, Everett asked, "Did Jason ever say why he left home?" Caleb was folding napkins. He paused for a moment, then resumed. "He said it wasn't safe, for him or for you." Everett stiffened. "My father." Caleb nodded. He didn't say much. Just that people didn't see the bruises you both carried. One showed on his skin, the other deeper. The words struck like thunder, loud in their truth, frightening in their calm. Everett remembered the sharpness of his father's voice, the way Jason would intercept it, a shield without complaint. He remembered the silence their mother kept, her eyes flinching without ever moving. He had never told anyone that he used to hide spoons under his mattress, to hear something clatter when his father entered the room, some noise that would make the silence bearable. "I didn't forget him," Everett said. Caleb looked up. "But you tried to." They both fell into a shared hush, two timelines overlapping, one boy once running, the other still searching for a home that hadn't burned down from the inside out. Later that week, Everett took Caleb to one of his properties, a small building in the Bronx unused for years, covered in graffiti. The windows still intact only because no one bothered to break them. "I was going to sell this," Everett said, "but I think it could be something else." Caleb tilted his head. "Like what?" "A kitchen," Everett said. "A real one, community-run, named after Jason." Caleb didn't respond right away. He walked the perimeter slowly, stepping over broken glass and plastic bags. He touched the brick with the reverence of someone remembering a prayer. "He would have liked that," Caleb said quietly. "He always said the best meals are the ones made together." Everett's voice was low. "Then we'll build it together." And they did, slowly, awkwardly, with trial and error and mismatched help. Former volunteers pitched in. Local artists offered to paint the walls. The funds came easily. Everett's empire was vast, but the work was what made it real. He insisted on laying the first bricks himself, hands blistering under unfamiliar weight. Word spread. They called it Jason's table. On opening day, Everett didn't speak. Caleb did. He stood on a makeshift podium, wearing a clean shirt someone had donated, holding a microphone like it might dissolve in his hand. His voice trembled, but it didn't break. "I used to think people like him disappeared," Caleb said. "But they don't. They stay in the things they made matter." He didn't thank Everett. He didn't need to. The silence between them was full of mutual recognition, like two mirrors finally facing each other after years of reflecting nothing. Inside the kitchen, the first dish they served was mushroom risotto. There were no white tablecloths, no maitre d', just folding chairs and laughter, and the kind of hunger that had nothing to do with food. Everett sat among them, apron stained, sleeves rolled up. He watched Caleb hand out plates with the focus of someone who finally had something to protect, and for the first time in years, Everett didn't feel like a fraud. He didn't feel rich. He didn't feel poor. He just felt human. That night, he walked home alone. No driver, no escort. The sky was clear for once, the stars just barely visible above the city haze. Outside his building, a woman leaned against the brick wall, cradling a baby in one arm and a sandwich in the other. She didn't ask him for anything. But Everett reached into his coat pocket and handed her something anyway. Not money. A card. The name on it. Jason's table. Her eyes flicked up to his, wary. "What is this?" "Somewhere warm," he said. "With real food. People who care." She stared at it, then back at him. "Why?" He smiled softly. "Because someone once shouted, 'Don't eat that.' And I listened." Winter came early that year. The cold arrived not with snow, but with a stillness that wrapped the city in silence. Frost formed along the edges of windows like delicate warnings. At Jason's table, the warmth inside grew louder, pots clattering, stories shared between spoonfuls, names remembered and repeated with care. Caleb had taken on more responsibilities. He greeted guests, managed donations, even started writing names on each plate with a marker, just first names, but it made people feel seen. Everett watched him move with a quiet gravity, as though he were anchoring something invisible that no one else dared to touch. One afternoon, Caleb approached Everett in the kitchen. "There's someone you should meet." Everett wiped his hands, followed the boy through the back corridor into the storage room, where an older man stood near the shelves, turning a can of beans in his hands like it was a relic. He wore a coat 2 sizes too large and had a limp that slowed his balance. "Mr. Cole?" the man asked. Everett nodded, cautious. "I knew your brother, back in '09. He used to bring leftover stew to the rail yard where we slept. Most didn't bother with us, but he did." Everett swallowed. "What was he like?" The man smiled. "Like someone who remembered being forgotten." That night, Everett sat alone in the office above the kitchen. The lights below flickered through the frosted glass, casting soft shadows on the floor. He opened a drawer and pulled out the photograph Caleb had given him, the only image he had of Jason that wasn't fading in his memory. He placed it on the desk, beside a single white plate. Then, slowly, he plated a small portion of mushroom risotto. He didn't eat it, just let it sit there, warm, honest, waiting, a plate for the man who never sat at the table himself. Jason's table didn't become famous. It didn't trend. But people talked, not online, but in line, in whispers and nods and stories exchanged over lentils and rice. The name spread across the city, carried by those who had once been silent. One day, Caleb came in late. He looked different, taller maybe, or just older. "I enrolled," he said. Everett raised an eyebrow. "Community college. Hospitality, food systems. Thought maybe I'd learn the rules so I could break them better." Everett smiled, pride swelling in places he hadn't known could still stretch. "Jason would have been proud." Caleb paused. "You know, I think he already was." Outside, snow finally fell. Not hard, just enough to soften the city's edges. Everett looked out the window. his breath fogging the glass. Inside, someone had started singing, a low hum, off-key but full of joy. He thought of the boy who had shouted once, who had stopped everything with 3 words. And he thought of the man who had died to keep those words from becoming Caleb's last. Sometimes love doesn't look like what the world says it should. Sometimes it's a boy yelling in the park, a plate of risotto, a name on a wall no one will tear down. And sometimes it's a billionaire learning how to serve. The world didn't change overnight. The buildings still loomed, the headlines still blinked coldly across screens, and the gap between wealth and want still yawned wide. But somewhere in the city's quiet veins, something real pulsed, soft, persistent. Everett Cole, once a man of closed doors and higher floors, now walked differently, slower, not because he had lost anything, but because he had finally begun to carry something worth the wait. His name wasn't on the front sign of Jason's table. That was never the point. The honor belonged to the one who stayed when Everett left, who held the line when no one else would, and who believed that love, real love, could be served one meal at a time. Caleb's hands grew stronger, his voice steadier. He still wrote names on plates, but now he taught others to do the same. He understood what Jason had given him, and what Everett had helped him reclaim. Not charity, but dignity. And somewhere beyond the kitchen doors and the steam-filled windows, the boy who once shouted, "Don't eat that," no longer needed to warn the world. Because now he was feeding it. There are people we forget and people we try to become. But sometimes, if we're lucky, the ones we forgot help us remember who we truly are. Not with grand speeches or gestures, but in quiet revolutions, in the bite of something warm, in the echo of a name whispered with care. Jason's table didn't save the world, but it saved them. And maybe that's enough. If this story found a quiet place inside you, stay. Listen. There are more voices waiting to be heard.